This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Terry Ann Palo, and I'm a regional planner with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the funding that made this speaker series possible. This event is supported by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Resilient Florida program, which is dedicated to enhancing the state's resilience to flooding and sea level rise. The Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, as a regional resilience entity, plays a key role in coordinating these efforts, providing technical assistance and collaborating across counties and municipalities to develop strategies for mitigating the impacts of climate change. We're incredibly grateful for their support in fostering this important conversation. A little bit about the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. We were established in 1976 and serves as the only regional forum where elected and appointed leaders from Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, and Palm Beach counties come together to address complex regional issues. This year, TCRPC is celebrating its 50th anniversary. The council develops strategic solutions and builds consensus around key priorities such as urban design, economic development, transportation, emergency preparedness, and natural resources. Made up of 19 local elected officials and 9 gubernatorial appointees, TCRPC plays a vital role in shaping the future of the Treasure Coast through collaboration and coordinated planning. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. First, Tara McHugh. She's the Executive Director of the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. With over 20 years at the Council, Tara leads regional efforts in planning, resilience, and sustainability across 8 counties and 78 cities. She is a certified planner and holds degrees from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and the Florida Institute of Technology. Our second speaker is Jessica Seymour, Principal Program Coordinator at the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. With over 15 years of experience in architecture and urban design, she has led key planning initiatives, including form-based codes and master plans for communities along the Treasure Coast. She is a licensed architect and a graduate of the University of Miami. Now, please join me in welcoming Tara and Jessica.
Thank you, Terry Ann. If you will let me share my screen, I can go ahead and get started.
There you go.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much for letting me join you today on your Resilient Speaker Series. Well, between Jessica and I, hopefully we'll answer all the questions you have about this collaborative project between 6 regional planning councils. So Terry Ann gave a little bit of insight into regional planning councils, but there are 10 of us across the state of Florida. East Central Florida was established in 1962. So we are one of the first RPCs, and like Treasure Coast, we are a quasi-governmental agency and really known to be the convener of governments within our region. Our board is made up of 35 board members from across our 8 counties, a few of our municipalities, and of course, our regional partners. So this is a little bit more of a zoomed in version of where East Central Florida Regional Planning Council is and the counties that make us up. So we are very diverse. We have 2 coastal counties as well as 3 pretty urban counties, and then 3 rural counties all the way up into Marion Lake and Sumter. So a very diverse region, but we do face a lot of similar issues and concerns and opportunities. So it's a really great region to work in. Within those 8 counties, we have 78 cities and 4.7 million people that we serve. So I'm going to get into the project and where this all stemmed from. So if you all remember back in Hurricane Irma, as that hurricane came across Florida, it really turned into a conversation of our boards and many of the boards across the regional planning councils that looking at impacts from hurricanes and from tropical systems is not just a coastal issue. We were experiencing flooding, as many of you, in areas that never flooded before, or not to the degree that we were experiencing in Hurricane Irma. So it led to the conversation of, is this really a 100-year storm? Is it a 500-year storm? How are these conditions changing? What do we need to plan for in the future? And what is that future going to look like? So regional planning councils have a history of working together across our regional planning council lines to do projects such as this. So all the regional planning councils across the state work on the statewide regional evacuation study. So trying to answer this question of what does this look like when it comes to future rainfall, future extreme rainfall, and assisting conversations across the regions in how to plan for that was really something that we took to heart, and it really hit where regional planning councils do a great job at coordinating, again, across our regional lines, but then across multiple county lines within our own region. So why were we looking at extreme rainfall? So like I said, Hurricane Irma, and then through the project, Hurricane Ian, really just reiterated the idea that we can't keep thinking that hurricanes are a coastal problem. Yes, there's storm surge, there's erosion, but the impacts are becoming greater and greater in some of our inland communities, a lot of our rural communities, and our underserved communities. And by understanding what future extreme rainfall is going to look like by 2050 or 2080 can really help us plan better now to help reduce those impacts to people and to secure the welfare of people and property through appropriate planning. Maybe it's policy decisions, maybe it's emergency preparedness protocols, and maybe it's some flood mitigation projects. So there's no one thing that's going to mitigate all the stormwater that we're facing through these hurricanes, summer storms, etc. However, understanding what we're facing can help lead to some of those conversations. So the 6 regional planning councils came together because our boards were having, again, those same conversations. And in 2021, early in 2021, late 2020, we went ahead and applied to Florida Commerce for their community development block grant in their mitigation planning section in order to do quite a few things. And what we wanted to do was close a bunch of gaps, which I'll talk about in a second. But the program really was a regional focus to develop a statewide approach. We were awarded nearly $1.5 million to do this, again, over 40 plus counties, 6 regional planning councils. It was a really big task. It was a really big project. So we were awarded this in 2022. At the same time, almost in perfect harmony, Resilient Florida legislation was passed in 2021. So some of the gaps we were trying to fill and some of the conversations we were trying to have, the state was really pushing those conversations as well. So since 2015, through the peril of flood legislation, again, most of that resilience planning, looking at vulnerability assessments, they were all for counties like all of yours, right? They were all coastal counties. But then that Resilient Florida legislation in 2021 that passed was really forcing the conversation inland. And it was a great tool and conversation starter to be utilized in conjunction with this project that we were undertaking. But at the same time, we needed to shift some of our work to align with some of the direction that this legislation was going in. But it also provided some more value to our project. So as I was stating before, we wanted to address an unmet need by examining the gap in what future flooding looks like. At the point when we were writing this grant and starting this project, nobody was really looking at future flood conditions. The Water Management District in South Florida was starting those conversations, and there was the Florida Building Code project that came out, which we utilized for this project, as well as conversations with Southwest Florida, but really a statewide approach to looking at extreme rainfall, developing parameters, and applying it to 40 plus counties. That was still a gap in all of our work. And then as the state was implementing the Resilient Florida program, utilizing this data to augment the vulnerability assessments was going to be a really added value throughout the state. And of course, building capacity, especially in these inland counties that had not really been talking about vulnerabilities and resilience in terms of like we had been on the coast. It was really a great opportunity to start building that capacity, not just on the coast side, but in our inland communities as well, and then across the state, but in also pulling in all different sectors and disciplines and agencies together, having these conversations. And one of the ultimate goals of this project was to set our entities up for success for funding opportunities. And so I'll talk about that a little bit towards the end of the presentation. So I'm not going to go through all the pieces and parts of the project. There were many over the many years, but some key items to keep in mind is that stakeholder engagement and feedback, and having a big feedback loop throughout this process was really vital. It started from day one when we asked the question, who's doing what when it comes to extreme rainfall and how should we approach this, to quality controlling a lot of the outputs and working with our entities to put projects on our regional project list. All in all, the end outputs really are forward facing. So you all have access to data, information, and best practices to help you all be successful. So in order to do the project, everything starts from a baseline. We needed to figure out who's doing what when it comes to looking at future extreme rainfall. Where do we start? Who do we bring to the table for these conversations? And so we, after an initial statewide discussion, we narrowed down a technical advisory team, which was comprised of several universities, the Flood Hub, the South Florida Water Management District, and DEP. And looking at what the Water Management District was doing, the Florida Building Code statewide study, and the direction that Flood Hub was going in, the technical advisory team settled on an approach to use Cordex change factor data. Reason why we use Cordex change factor data at this time, we made this decision back in 2024. We did not have the direction from the Flood Hub at that time. We had waited a little bit to see if the advisory group was going to be able to help us out with this direction, but we had to, in order to be compliant with our grant, we had to move forward and move in this direction. So the Cordex data was available for every county that we were working on. It was available statewide, and it really fell in that median area as with what the water management was doing. So we felt very comfortable modeling that along a 100-year, 24-hour time frame. Now that the Flood Hub has come out, or their draft change factors, and since our original model was done in ArcGIS, there is an update being done now to move it over. We spent the last year moving it over into ArcPro and updating it so the change factors that come from the state can be put in the application, so you can look at those change factors as well as other ones that you may want to look at and see how the data interpolates all of that. So this was the base data that we used in order to, or the base change factors we used in order to feed our GIS plugin tool. So this tool was created so that we could screen and assess what these future rainfall change factors, what that looks like on the ground. So our consultant developed the Inundate tool. It is really important to understand that this is an overland precipitation flow and ponding tool. We call it a screening tool. It is not a hydrologically based model. It is not an H&H model. It does not incorporate a lot of the man-built infrastructure like control gates or some of the other infrastructure for stormwater. It is simply a surface flow model. The capacity and effort it would have taken to cover over 40 counties through an H&H model would have been way beyond the capacity of the funding that was even available. We know it would have been millions of dollars in order to do that. So this was the best approach to start conversations around extreme rainfall and identify really areas to expand the conversation. Where should be priority areas to do more work, to do more modeling. So it's a really good tool to start the conversation. But as many modelers and data people know, not one tool can be used for any piece of decision making. There's a lot of other information that needs to go into this. And that's something to keep in mind with the Inundate tool. The Inundate tool allowed us to look at exposure. So in that, Resilient Florida had all the guidelines for the vulnerability assessments. We essentially were doing a vulnerability assessment for extreme rainfall. So we were working really hard to make sure that we are following the parameters of Resilient Florida. So we were looking at regional critical assets, local critical assets, all the things that you all would be looking at for your vulnerability assessments. And we identified which ones are exposed to future extreme rainfall. But beyond that, that's not the only piece when you come to decision making and where efforts really need to be made. We need to be looking at the social context of it. So we conducted a sensitivity analysis as also required from DEP. So we created a social vulnerability index. We worked with the University of Central Florida to do this and expand beyond just the SOVI data from the health department. And what we, by overlaying the exposure and the sensitivity, we could really understand the social characteristics of these impacted areas. And as decision makers and planners and emergency response, we can better figure out what needs to be done in some areas to help not just mitigate rainfall, but provide resources to very vulnerable communities. So by overlaying exposure and sensitivity, like I said, it kind of screens areas where we really should be having priority conversations, where we can be having dialogue, where additional model or research might be needed. Maybe it's even policy changes or land use changes to go in and really avoid development in some areas might be the case as well. So really it was focusing on a large scale regional view of information to then delve deeper down on the still a regional level. We like to always look at things multi-jurisdictionally, but because that's the direction that we generally always go, but it also provides data to our local entities and really just focusing on having the greatest impact for whatever decisions we move forward. So from that, taking all the data and looking at it together and then having conversations with our locals, we talked about the stakeholder engagement and them validating the information. We worked with our local communities to develop regional priority areas. And we preface this with, these are not the end all be all most important areas within any region. For this purpose of this report, these were the areas that we were going to focus in because of the time constraints that we had. But this, in our view, is the priority areas are a living concept. And as things change, that these areas can change as well. More can be added to our priority area list. But these were comprised of both quantitative data and qualitative data. And then since we had multiple storms during this process, we were able to, again, look at that historical information and, quality control and make sure that these truly were really impacted areas. So every RPC came up with at least 4 or 5 different types of priority areas in the region, depending upon the size. And so what we were doing during our project timeframe is working within these areas, working with the jurisdictions to identify what do you have going on in these areas that we could put on our regional project list, or we still have from the previous storms, we still have people requesting projects that they can assist with. Do we have something going on in these priority areas that we could help to move forward? And then really position maybe some grant funding or leverage some other resources to advance conversations in these regional priority areas. So, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but having these conversations about finding applicable solutions, it's not one size fits all. You could have projects, flood mitigation projects. Listen, we just got to build some stuff here in order to mitigate the flooding. Maybe there's a stormwater park we can implement. Maybe there's some policy changes that it's an area that really could be bought out and changed into something else so that we don't put life and property in harm's way. Land use changes, maybe changing some density, could acquisitions, those could be some solutions. Partnerships to make it all happen, that's huge as well. And then green infrastructure during this process and leading up to this process was a very big conversation. And so when we were creating this, working through this project, we were identifying various examples of green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, GSI. And so we wanted to make sure that we were educating and providing these solutions to our partners. At the same time as we were kicking this off, DEP was starting their GSI portal and database to highlight a lot of these types of projects that were occurring around the state for examples. So we definitely didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And so we wanted to point people in that direction and then provide additional resources. So what we ended up doing was creating a portal for best practices, because yes, people are always saying, where's a great example of a nature-based solution in this type of environment or this type of context. But then they would also be asking, who has the best nature-based solutions or low impact development policies or land development codes? And so what we wanted to do was create a tool for everybody to go to for a one-stop shop and have access to the best of the best information that we were able to find. So through this QR code, you can access the portal, and I believe Terry Ann's going to send this out after, so you'll have access to it. But essentially, we looked at projects. So this is a screenshot where you can look at projects around green infrastructure, hybrid, and even gray infrastructure projects for flood mitigation. We know green is not always going to be the best fit, and a lot of times, it is going to be gray infrastructure or a combination thereof. So this is zoomed to Florida, but there are examples in here from across the ocean, so internationally and across the US. So when you click on the link, it'll on a dot, it'll give you a little bit of information, but then link you to their project page, because again, it's a portal. We didn't want to recreate the information. We wanted to lead you to the best information available. We did highlight some projects throughout the portal as well, just different kinds of context. So this is an example out of Atlanta, and it is a very urban area, that 16 acres though, so it is, in the grand scheme of things, not a very large park, but it is a hybrid stormwater park. I say hybrid because it functions as a wetland during wet season and then a great community asset during the dry season. So that's a really great example if you didn't want to just have an area that would remain wet the entire year. This is the Ocala Wetland Recharge Park. This is one that's out of our region. This is a really interesting project because it is a wetland park, but yet it's recharging the aquifer, and it is taking water, reclaimed water and storm water, and filtering it through a decommissioned wastewater treatment plant to clean it before it even gets into this area. So it was a really unique opportunity to utilize different pieces of the environment as well as city infrastructure. And then, of course, some of the assets that always flood are roads, which is always better than someone's home, but it's still something that needs to be dealt with. And so, like I said, green infrastructure is not going to do it all. So in this example, it is a roadway type of flood project. They did include green infrastructure to help clean some of the water before it gets into this system, and then have some downstream positive impacts into those waterways. But this is a great example of a way to incorporate a hybrid stormwater solution in the built environment. So like I said, we wanted to focus not just on projects, but we wanted to give you all tools so that you could look at codes. You don't have to start from scratch. You can see what's out there for your codes, your policies. For manuals, there's a lot of manuals LID manuals, even stormwater manuals, and Winter Haven has a one water master plan. So we included some of those. And then there's great organizations that have even more information. So we included organizations like I said, the DEP GSI website, South Florida Water Management District, and the Florida Stormwater Association. This tool is a living document, or a living tool, it's a story map. So if you went and adopted LID or nature-based solution guidebook or manuals or codes and you think they're phenomenal, send them over to me and or to Terry Ann, and she'll get them to us. So this is a living document. We want to keep uploading it with the best available information so that you all are more successful in your endeavors. So ultimately what this comes down to is we have data, we have tools and resources, but at the end of that one slide at the beginning, I said we really wanted to set all of our partners up for success for getting funding for projects. So part of this work, we developed a regional flood mitigation list. So each RPC has their own regional mitigation list. And the purpose of this is to do a few things. Some of the conversation that we had been having and finding when applying for grants is these federal grants and even some of the foundation grants want regional projects. They want multiple entities at the table making sure their money goes further, they're having a bigger return of impact. So the ability to get one small project done in one small city, it's going to be a little bit more difficult now than getting two cities or a county and the city working on a project together that has a greater impact than just a smaller footprint. So we wanted to make sure that the projects on our list were regional in basis, but then some of these grant programs also are asking the question, is it on a list? Is it on a regional list? Or is it just in your capital improvement plan? Or was it just something that you just have a plan for, but it hasn't been identified or prioritized on any sort of list? So by creating this regional project list, we feel that it would give applications a bit more clout when you're writing your applications and saying, yes, my project is on the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council Regional Flood Mitigation List, right? So it's been identified by the 4 counties as a project to move forward. So to be on this list, we did develop some criteria. Again, it has to impact, the project itself has to impact more than one jurisdiction, meaning the footprint of the project of where the work is being occurred could be within one jurisdiction, but it is mitigating flood from downstream or upstream, however, those impacts would be. And so the impacts have to be more than just that one jurisdiction where the footprint is. Of course, it is a flood mitigation project list, so there has to be a history of increased flooding within the area. And of course, with all the conversation around bigger return on investment, we are really looking for projects that have co-benefits. Some of the projects I showed in the previous screen was great. It's a park, it's a stormwater park, but it also provides value space for the community as well. So, or there's environmental benefits. So those are this kind of co-benefits that we're looking for those projects. Through this CDBG MIT parameters of our grant, we were focusing within our priority areas for the conversations for developing the projects, just so we can be focused. But that doesn't mean that the projects have to only be confined within those priority areas. For us, and for the RPCs, they're open to any area within your region. It's just that for the planners working on this project, we needed to at least start conversations in some areas. So that's why we had those, we started in those priority areas. And then during those meetings we had with the federal interagencies, so FEMA, HUD, all of those agencies after some of the storms, some of those projects also made it onto the project list, which reminds me, one of the reasons for the project list, I forgot my third reason, is because we get so many phone calls, especially after a disaster or when they have some extra money from state agencies or federal agencies that say, we have money, we have technical assistance resources. Do you have any projects that are ready to go? And who do we need to contact? And so a lot of times, especially after a hurricane, when you guys don't want to hear like, hey, give us a project when you're out there trying to recover, by having this project list, we can easily identify which ones might fit certain asks that are coming into the regional planning councils. So it'll be a lot easier for us to at least have a starting point to help find funding for those projects instead of cold calling after a storm. So that was the third reason for those projects. So when it comes to the regional projects, I'm going to hand it off to Jessica in a second. We also created conceptual plans as part of this work. So, hey, we had these projects on a list. Let's pick 2 of them and figure out what they look like moving forward so that those projects are a little bit further ahead. So when a funding opportunity comes up, we can say, here's your conceptual plan, you're on our list, and let's see how we can move forward some partnerships and opportunities for funding. So Jessica is going to take over now to talk about those conceptual plans, and then when she's done, we can answer whatever questions you all have.
I am coming back on. You guys can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you for the explaining all of the modeling, which is far beyond my capabilities. But we really enjoyed working with the maps and all of the screening tools to identify these small area plans with the stakeholders. So Tara already went through the fact that there are a lot of aspects to this project and all the deliverables, and I'm just going to go through the small area mitigation plans. Through the 6 RPCs, we had 12 plans identified, 2 for each region, and we did try to get as much variation in the projects between our different conditions. So we'll have rural and much more urban projects. We have some that are actually still coastal because it does still rain on the coast, and some that are inland. When it came to selecting the small areas, that's again where the mapping and this process that was set out by the larger project was incredibly helpful. We first looked, of course, with our partners on where was the high exposure, where was that inundation happening. The regional knowledge from the stakeholders came into play there as well. Where there was high sensitivity, so those were those social markers that Tara had mentioned already. And then key to each of these projects is that there is a cross-jurisdictional boundary. So sometimes it might be a city county, it might be state-owned lands and federal lands with a county, but trying to target those projects that may be harder to launch because you do have more stakeholders and you need to find out where the common goals are and where that interface is. So this is an example of all those factors put together into a map from our region. This is a neighborhood, Gifford, and it's also close to the Vero Beach boundary and the airport. So you'll notice the area in blue, that's where the projected flooding is. The area in purple is the flood hazard area right now. I keep pointing with my finger as if you can see that. So I'm going to start using my mouse now. And then these are some of the critical assets that were mapped. And so we start to see not only do we have people's homes that are being impacted, but the airport is being impacted, drinking water facilities, a critical roadway, where this projected flooding is. And that, again, we verified with our regional partners, you know, if they had seen that with flooding events, and then they did. This is a snapshot of the 12 projects and their different contexts. We're going to go through one from each region, and in the interest of time, I'll probably go through them pretty quickly. But if you have any questions about any of them, I'm happy to answer those after. So Treasure Coast, I mentioned the Gifford neighborhood. We focused in particularly on this canal network here, ditch network, that runs north-south and then turns east-west. You'll see to the west of that, there was a significant amount of flooding projected there in that orange color. The orange is nearer term and the green is farther out. The different blue colors you'll see repeated in each of these maps shows where there's existing bodies of water or swamps. So what we did was we took a look at the neighborhood and how we could build some more capacity for water and direct it to areas where it would have less of an impact. And we illustrated what that could look like. While we were illustrating those improvements, though, we also kept in mind for how can we involve recreation and community amenities while this construction is happening, and have an end result that improves the neighborhood for multiple reasons. Some of these elements, they may not at first seem related to stormwater benefits, but trees actually have a significant impact on sucking up the water from the ground if they're planted in the right locations and they have the space to grow. This is an example of an oak tree, and this tool here, it's called iTree. It's a fascinating tool where you can go in and put in a different tree species with your zip code, and it can tell you what kind of stormwater impact it can have in that area, or an estimated impact. We also looked beyond the canals and how resiliency and responding to flooding also is about making our structures stronger and better. And so in this neighborhood in particular, getting the buildings up out of that floodplain would also greatly improve their ability to respond to flooding in the future. Northeast Florida, this is another neighborhood retrofit concept. This is a coastal example where we also on this flooding map start to see these pink lines, which are the drain lines, or the path that the water is following, which was really helpful for us to understand the impacts to this neighborhood that we're calling the Oceanside neighborhood. It's just to the south of Marineland in Flagler County. And they've had some significant impacts from rain. And this is, to the right is a picture of A1A, which is a critical road for access. And it has become one with the river in this image, I think. We looked at some other communities that have had neighborhood retrofits for stormwater impacts. And this project in Martin County in Old Palm City takes a look at storing water and also treating it before it's discharged into the river. We thought this was an excellent example to follow for this neighborhood, where they did have a significant number of parcels that are still not, haven't been developed. So we mapped all those vacant parcels and took a look at those drain lines, and instead of fighting the water, where can we allow the water to flow through the neighborhood and create the least amount of impact? It also would hopefully connect this, what is the state park to the north, and a county stormwater facility to the south, so that those can all work together as a system rather than as independent entities. Dune restoration too is something that we recommended in this concept because again, focused on the rainfall, it's not helpful if you also have, the inundation from the storm, from the water as well, from the beach side as well. So looking at it in a very comprehensive way. This project also was high on impact because there's a high number of septic tanks in this neighborhood. And of course, that's a huge priority for this community. We think a lot about water quality, but it's also a health and health issue when you have a flooding event to have a lot of septic tanks in your community, because the water doesn't have boundaries when it overtakes your neighborhood that way. So there's a health impact. So we helped this project will hopefully bring that issue to the front. This is a rendering of what that can look like, and then this is the existing condition of one of those streets. And then again, these stormwater parks can become an amenity that the whole community can enjoy, while also cleaning and storing the water and mitigating those flood impacts. In Tampa Bay, so we're back on the coast again, but on the other coast, we had an interesting relationship here between a neighborhood and the MacDill Air Force Base. So the MacDill Air Force Base has some of the flooding impacts, but what they're really being impacted by is the access points. So this Bayshore Drive condition has been flooding, and again, the modeling showed how significant the flooding is projected to be in that condition. So we tried again to take a look at all hands on deck to address the flooding concerns. So looking at how we can get capacity within the street is with trees to address stormwater, bioswales that can suck up some of those water in a more efficient neighborhood that's already built out. And then we also looked at, you'll start to see in this map here, a rendering of how the shoreline has been extended. This is something that they've already done on the Air Force side of the little peninsula that comes out there. And so we're recommending extending that to the Bayshore Drive onto the community side as well. And then again, building with plantings and the oyster beds along there. So in this rendering right here, the pink line that you see coming across is actually an expansion of the shoreline. And you can see how it's carrying forward what was done already on the MacDill Air Force Base side. Through this conversation, there was also there's an opportunity for some beneficial dredged material to create some water barriers along this coastline, again, to help diminish the wave action. So this was a really interesting conversation that again came out of the outreach between the Air Force, the base, the community, and the port, talking about how can we use these materials that will come from dredging the port or deepening the port, and using those for a resilience project that would help this access point and the neighborhood. Arcadia, this is another more neighborhood-based project. This one, you'll look at on the left side of your screen, the red is the area of flooding, and this is where they did in fact see significant flooding through storm events. And you see how small the drain, the path of the water gets towards this wetland, what had been a wetland. And essentially, what we looked at is that there's a stopper happening and a relationship between the way the water wants to flow and has historically flowed to the Peace River, and it is a stopper in the system. So building off of the work that has already been done in the region with a long-term recovery plan and the Florida Heartland Recovery and Resiliency Partnership Project, we did another a detailed plan of this area where there's an existing stopper, and how we can widen and improve upon that flow of water back to the Peace River so that the water goes to the river and again, not into the streets and into the neighborhoods. So we did that. And then we also combined these two studies that I'm mentioning had parallel recommendations, some of them more focused on the stormwater, some on general resiliency. And so we put both of those ideas together into this one site plan for the neighborhood. And then this is a partnership between the city and the county. This area is right on that edge between some county roads and then the city of Arcadia. So this is an opportunity for that partnership, particularly along the southern edge of the roadway, where again, we can start to build in a little bit of that gray infrastructure next to the green infrastructure to capture some of that stormwater. In North Central Florida, in Live Oak, the town of Live Oak is already working towards addressing some of these flooding concerns. They have a similar scenario where you can kind of see this pink line coming through, connecting what has been undeveloped land and then some of the adjacent historic downtown. And they've been seeing flooding along those lines. And again, the mapping also echoed that. So they've already started to look at siting a new stormwater pond on what had been previously a farmland right here. So the town has purchased that. What we brought to the table is taking a look at the fact that to create this, they're going to be using some gray infrastructure along the way and putting in new pipes. So along with the new pipes, it's another opportunity to finish out the sidewalk network where there's some inconsistent sidewalks, plant those shade trees and improve access to these neighborhood parks and the trail network that's existing around this area. And so these are some illustrations of what those improvements on the street might look like and what some of those improvements with the stormwater could look like as well. And we hope that, again, these exhibits that we've all been describing can be something that can become part of a grant application and also tools to talk to the community about what the goals of a project are going forward. And then our last project to go through is Mud Lake. And Tara, if you want to jump in at any point and add to the conversation, please do. This is an example of a city-county relationship. Mud Lake is in the city of Cocoa, and Brevard County is to the south. And Mud Lake has historically taken on a lot of the stormwater around this area. It's natural flow, and then it would flow to the south towards a neighborhood called Catalina Village. Since that time, though, there's been a sizable amount of flooding. I'll go back one more time. You'll see all the flooding that's happened to that neighborhood to the south. At the same time, there's also a growing body of research that the RPC and others have been engaged in documenting how Mud Lake has deteriorated over time. And again, essentially, there's been a series of stoppers as development has happened where Mud Lake is not taking the water. It's still moving south, but it's finding other ways of getting there. And the city of Cocoa long ago had realized the importance of Mud Lake for the town, for the city, and for the region, and started the process of creating conservation lands and access to those conservation lands. So what we did is we took an updated approach to that concept and took into some consideration some more development that's happened and some pending development that's happening. So there is a lot of excitement about passenger rail service coming to this area. So we outlined where appropriate redevelopment might be, and then also opportunities, because there's some road widening that's planned in the area where there could be partnerships with FDOT to restore parts of Mud Lake rather than creating an isolated pond in another area. How can we create more of a network and reinforce these historic flows rather than doing some isolated stormwater storage? We also talk a lot in this project about the policy of conservation and the value of it. And then this is a figure that's borrowed from the Thousand Friends of Florida study, the economics of development. And it talks a lot about the benefits and the numbers behind the benefits of doing conservation and keeping open spaces in your long-term costs. There's also opportunities for adding recreation and access points, green space that people can enjoy along an amenity like this. This is a rendering, conceptual rendering of the goals that would happen along that Mud Lake, more additional native restoration, trails, parks, and access so that it's a monitored amenity. And then the removal of invasives and littoral plantings will help to protect Mud Lake, and then again increase its storage capacity over time and to help those communities to the south. And Tara, again, you may want to add to this. There's also, since this study has been going on, the little growers who is a advocacy group. They've received grants to continue to this conversation about how to build upon the green infrastructure along Mud Lake. So that's very exciting to start to see that. Again, my contact information is there if anybody wanted to reach out to me about any of these projects and some of the concepts that were gone through in those. At that, I can turn it over to any questions for Tara or I.
Thank you, Jessica and Tara. Any questions from the group on anything they presented today? Okay, seeing none. Thank you both for the presentation. I'm going to share my screen to quickly go through some announcements, and then we'll end our call. So earlier this month, we here at the Regional Planning Council, it's another project that we collaborated with our sister councils. It's a draft resilient benefit cost analysis toolkit. It was designed to help local governments evaluate resilience projects ranging from road elevations to hybrid living shorelines by quantifying their economic, environmental, and social benefits. I just wanted to let everyone be aware that there is now a public facing website for you to access instead of the Dropbox link. You can find it through that QR code. It's hosted on the South Florida Regional Planning Council's website. They are having an office hour on March 30th at 9 to 10 so that you can ask more questions about the toolkit, share your input, and test some project scenarios with them. We're also having our joint meeting with the South Florida Regional Planning Council on April 10th over at the Palm Beach MPO. Some topics that will be discussed are coral reefs, opportunity zones, data centers, advanced air mobilities, and that's all I can recall off the top of my head for right now. The Resilient Florida program is having virtual office hours starting next month for current grantee assistance and pre-application support for those interested in applying for a Resilient Florida grant. The next FDEP Quarterly Resilience Forum is Wednesday, May 6th at 9 a.m. The next South Florida Water Management District Resiliency Coordination Forum is going to be on Wednesday, June 24th at 9 a.m. And then our next speaker series will be held on April 29th at 2 p.m. It's going to feature Dr. Nina Stark, the Executive Director from the Center for Coastal Solutions, University of Florida. Stay tuned for how to get registered for that. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or any ideas for topics for the speaker series. Thank you.